Hi, my name is Britt. I work for YWCA Spokane, and while I am practicing some responsible social distancing right now, I thought it would be cool to make a video about healthy relationships and what those can look like and feel like for people. One of my favorite tools to talk about relationships is, some people call it the relationship spectrum, I call it the relationship stoplight. So I made one of these handy dandy guys here. You can make your own. I would highly encourage you to. You can adapt it for kids, you can adapt it for adults, teens, you can use it to talk about romantic relationships, professional relationships, friendships even. Any sort of relationship that you want to talk about the dynamics of, you can use this as a tool for it. I came up with some of my own examples for this. You can come up with some of your own examples for this. Yours might look a little different than mine. That's okay. I think that everybody's relationships might look a little different, and that's a good thing. So I came up with some common examples that I have seen and heard in my professional life, my personal life, just research, life experience. And I think that the abusive section is probably the one that's the most universally defined out of all of these sections on here. These two, the yellow and the green, are going to be a bit more personal to people. They might be a bit more subjective. My red section down here is taken a lot from power and control wheels. If you've never seen a power and control wheel, you can Google that. There are lots of different examples of power and control wheels for different populations. It's just a way to sort of break down common categories of abusive behaviors so that it's easier for people to spot them out in the wild. So I'm going to talk about some kind of general subjects on here, but obviously I'm not going to cover everything, and yours might look a little different if you make your own, which is why I think you should make your own. So I like to start with the bad news and end with the good news. So I'm going to start at the bottom here and work my way up. So starting down here, part of the reason why I like to use red to associate with this section is because it pairs so nicely with the idea of red flags, which is something a lot of people are already familiar with. So a couple of key things off the top. So if someone is controlling of your finances, controlling of what you wear, how you wear your hair, who your friends are, your social media, your job, your money, your reproductive choices, anything like that, if you feel like important parts of your life are more under another person's control than your own, that can be a big red flag. Violent behavior. Now, violent behavior, physical violence against a person is probably the most stereotypical trait of an abusive relationship that we talk about in the media, in our general kind of collective consciousness talking about abusive relationships. However, someone does not need to be physically violent in order to be violent. Physical violence does happen in a lot of abusive relationships, but it's not the only thing that happens in abusive relationships, and violence does not always mean physical contact. Violence can look like threats of violence. Violence can look like threats of violence to you, your kids, your pets, anything that you care about. It can look like hurting your pets in order to hurt you. It can look like hurting your property in front of you. Anything that suggests, here's what I'm capable of doing, you should be scared of me. Violent behavior. Always a big red flag. Next up, if someone is intentionally sabotaging you or trying to hurt your feelings, we're going to accidentally hurt people's feelings. That's a thing that's going to happen sometimes, and that's a thing that we're going to have to remedy when it comes up. But if someone is intentionally hurting you, sabotaging you, that's typically a pretty big flag as well. And then also, if you feel like you're walking on eggshells around a person, this also ties into another point I have over here, which is where you always feel like you can't do the right thing. Like you can't do anything right for this person. It's never good enough. That walking on eggshells feeling of, what am I going to mess up on next? What are they going to yell at me about next? That's a big red flag. You should not feel like you are constantly having to monitor yourself that much, or feeling like you can't trust your own thoughts or your own opinions on a matter. Big flag. Something else that's a big red flag is that if they use things against you, so say for example you told them some things in confidence that are important to you, and they then use those things. So this can mean, for LGBTQ people, it can mean threatening to out you to people when you're not ready for it. It can mean threatening to tell your employer something that could get you in trouble. It can mean threatening to tell your family something that could get you in trouble. Those sorts of things are always a pretty big flag as well. And then one of the biggest signs for me about abusive relationships is that, I'll keep this still, any sort of improvement in the relationship is temporary, and that it always goes back to the same cycle. Abusive relationships are very cyclical. They're gonna always come back to that same spot, no matter how much improvement you think you've made. There's always going to be those honeymoon periods, those tension periods, and then those explosion periods. Those don't all happen the same way for everybody. It could happen once an hour, once a day, twice a year. Could change all the time, but there's always that cycle of things get better and then they get worse again. That's a pretty big sign of an abusive relationship. So now that we've got those sections covered, we're gonna go to this one up here. So yellow, unhealthy, and then healthy relationships. We'll start with unhealthy. All or nothing communication, or just communication that doesn't work for you. So if you find that your communication pattern and their communication pattern don't line up, if you can't ever seem to find a good balance, that can lead to some unhealthy dynamics. If you feel like your boundaries are being pushed, so someone doesn't have to bulldoze right through our boundaries in order to be disrespecting them. If you feel like you're always having to explain your boundaries, restate your boundaries. If you feel like your boundaries are being questioned or like kind of pushed on, that can lead to some unhealthy or just uncomfortable dynamics with a person. If you have a really strong level of codependence, that can often be very unhealthy. If you struggle to find things in common with somebody, so if you struggle to find things to talk about, if you struggle to find common interests, or if you're going to go over to this section here, if your goals and values don't coordinate, so if you find that your goals in life, your values in life don't line up with theirs, or don't coordinate, they don't have to be the same, they don't have to match, but if they don't coordinate, that can lead to some bad times. Your love languages, which I'll get to later, if you can't figure out a way to work around those, that can be an issue. And the thing for me that I think is the main difference between unhealthy and abusive is this. So unhealthy dynamics can be improved over time with effort or in another relationship. Sometimes it's just not the right relationship. Sometimes that's just not the right person for us. Sometimes we're just not the right person for them. And I think that being able to acknowledge that is another kind of good, healthy thing to learn about relationships, is that just because it didn't work in this relationship doesn't mean that it never will with somebody else. It doesn't mean that we're broken. It just means that maybe there's some things we need to work on, or maybe there's a different type of person we need to be with. Knowing how to end a relationship in a way that's kind and healthy is also a really mature, great thing to be able to learn how to do. And that's not, we don't need to avoid breakups just because breakups are unpleasant. Sometimes that's the healthiest thing we can do. So now we get to go to the green section up here. So this is some elements of healthy relationships. This is the happy part. Okay, so steady communication, or just the type of communication that you personally need in your relationship, whether that's more constant communication, less constant communication, more space, whatever. Figuring that out with the person you're with is really important. If you respect their boundaries and they respect yours, super important. I think that independence is fairly important in a relationship. I personally like a lot of independence in my relationships. Some people might like more or less independence than me, but just knowing what that looks like and feels like for you is a really valuable thing to know in a relationship. I think that a relationship is, people getting together because they want to, and they're still their own person, I think that can be a really healthy dynamic. Supportive, being supportive of your person, having them be supportive of you. I think that's a really big deal. Love languages. So I mentioned this earlier. Love languages are how you show or feel love. So there's lots of ways to find out what your love language is. There are lots of free quizzes online you can take. You can take them together, you can take them separately. But it's just a good thing to know about the people around you. And then these are just some kind of last general points. So I think that it's a really good sign if your life is generally better with this person in it.
if you have that feeling of my quality of life is better because I have this person with me, I think that's a pretty good sign. And then for me, these last two are really important, and I think they're important for a lot of people. Our relationships are never going to be perfect. We're never going to be perfect. But if we are willing to do the best we can and willing to learn, if we're willing to compromise to a healthy degree, I think that's what matters. You know, that healthy amount of flexibility. I think that that's great. And I think as long as we're willing to put in the time and the effort, a lot of good can come from that. So those are kind of my 3 sections. Just as a last note, if you feel like you are experiencing this bottom section here, or if someone you love is experiencing this, or, you know, anything like that, just know that the abuse is not your fault, and that you don't deserve that, and then that's not something that you have somehow earned or have put upon yourself. Abusive relationships happen to lots of people in lots of situations. There's a lot of people out there. You're not alone in that. You can always call our 24-hour line. So the YWCA Spokane 24-hour line is 509-326-2255. You can call that any time, day or night. Someone will pick up and sort of contact you about safety planning, resources, just letting you know you're not alone in that, and that we think it's important that everybody in the community knows that we are here for that exact thing. So I hope you found this helpful. I hope it was fun for you, and I hope you make your own stoplight, because I had fun with this.